My name is Matthew Kane, and this is the Dirty Air F1 podcast.
No. The gap box, guys.
Go ahead.
Hi, Michael. So we have an issue. We are not going to the grid. We try to fix it here. Please send somebody so that it's been supervised, please.
No, thank you. Both Manuel and Ignacio are in the garage with the car now. And just confirming you will not make it to the grid.
We will not make it to the grid.
Okay, thank you.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Dirty Air F1 podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Kane. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we get started, if you don't already follow me on social media, please do. I am at dirty_F1 on Twitter. My website is thedirtyairf1.com, and on Instagram and YouTube, I am the Dirty Air F1 podcast. I look forward to seeing you there. In this episode, I'll be bringing you up to speed in all the new F1 news, as well as all things Monaco Grand Prix, race recap, and qualifying for both the drivers and the teams. And as always, I welcome your thoughts, your questions, and your comments. All right, it's time to start the show. Before we discuss Monaco, I'm first going to talk about all the recent F1 news. The topic of flexible wings is back in Formula One again. Mercedes have taken great issue with the amount that the Red Bull rear wing is flexing. Sir Lewis Hamilton was the first one to make mention of it after following Max. And if you haven't seen it, it certainly is ingenious. And despite Mercedes' concern, Red Bull were allowed to use the rear wing in Monaco. No doubt, one of the concerns for Red Bull this year running the high rake would be their speed on the straightaways. It goes without saying that the higher the rake is on the car, the more drag they're going to have. The more drag you have, the less speed you're going to have. And I think it would be fair to suggest that Adrian Newey's way around this issue was to simply have a flexible rear wing. Now, when I say flexible rear wing, I don't mean a portion of the wing. I mean the entire wing assembly actually drops down under load at speed. This essentially acts like DRS for Red Bull on every single long straightaway. And now they have the best of both worlds. They have the high rake and high drag for the low speed, tight corners, and then the rear wing assembly drops down and gives them a DRS on every single straightaway. If the FIA does not step in and do something about this, I'm not too sure how Mercedes are going to be able to match them this season. And for this very reason, Toto Wolff and Mercedes have promised that messy lawsuits are on the horizon with Red Bull. Christian Horner fired back at Toto, bringing into question the flex of the Mercedes' front wing. So this saga is far from over. One thing is certain. As long as Red Bull is allowed to use that flexible rear wing, they're going to have a significant advantage over Mercedes. And if the FIA does not step in and do something about it, that significant advantage is going to last for the duration of this season and give Red Bull a noticeable advantage over Mercedes. Especially when you consider that Toto Wolff has come out and said that Mercedes will not be adding any significant upgrades to the car for the remainder of the season, and instead have chosen to tweak what they currently have while focusing on the 2022 car. Now that we are 5 races in, I have fully come to understand why Mercedes introduced the DAS system last year. One of the advantages of running a high rake setting on your car is that you're able to build temperatures quicker in the front tires. Mercedes, no doubt in anticipation for this year's rules and the elimination of the rear downforce, were looking to add some way to build temperature in those tires, thus the DAS system. With it banned for this season, Mercedes were definitely left on the back foot and had no real way to counteract the benefits of the high rake setting that Red Bull have been running for years. If you aren't a fan of Mercedes, but are a fan of Formula One, no doubt you are enjoying the new rules and how they've mixed up a bit of the order at the top. But if you're a Mercedes fan, you can't help but feel like a bit of this is kind of contrived. I, for one, would not like to see Mercedes dethroned this way. But again, unless the FIA step in and do something, I believe that the 2021 season will inevitably end up going to Red Bull, just like I had predicted in my 2021 predictions podcast. The FIA certainly have a difficult decision to make. If they decide to enforce the rules against the flexible wings, it could involve up to 8 teams, with the expected legal costs to be approximately $500,000. This won't make Mercedes very popular up and down the pit lane. Aston Martin is a team that has taken the initiative to just fix their rear wings in compliance with the FIA rules, and I wouldn't be surprised if other teams follow suit. Sadly, for us fans, the experts are now predicting that if each of the teams fix the flexible rear wings, they could lose half a second per lap in performance. And I think we all agree, every rule that is put in place to make the cars go slower is only a problem for the engineers and the aerodynamicists to overcome. And they usually do. But this year, with the budget cap in place and all the resources going towards 2022, I doubt many teams will spend too much money trying to overcome this issue and simply use what they have until next season. It certainly will be interesting to see how it all unfolds. But now, on to happier news. The 2021 Monaco Grand Prix represents the 750th Grand Prix for Williams F1 racing. It certainly has been quite a ride for Sir Frank Williams and Patrick Head, who started the team over 40 years ago and is now owned by Doralton Capital and the Latifi family. During that storied history, they managed to produce 7 World Championship drivers. Their first champion was Alan Jones in 1980, then K.K. Rosberg in 1982. Nelson Piquet then followed in 1987, followed by their most dominant period, where Nigel Mansell won in 92, Alain Prost won in 93, Damon Hill was 96, and finally, Jacques Villeneuve in 1997. The last 20 years have seen Williams go through some seriously difficult times. To see them celebrate their 750th Grand Prix is truly a wonderful achievement. Sincerest congratulations to everyone involved with this team throughout the years. It's been fun being a fan, and I celebrate your 750th Grand Prix along with everyone else in F1. And finally, before we get to the race recap, wasn't it cool to see McLaren sporting the Gulf Oil livery? Wow! Did they ever knock that one out of the ballpark? That car looked absolutely outstanding, and all the merchandise is already sold out. Unfortunately, it's only a one-off, which is really too bad because it obviously gave Lando some pretty darn good luck. Sadly, the same thing can't be said for the Honey Badger, but we'll discuss that later in the show. So without further ado, it's time for the 2021 Monaco Grand Prix Qualifying and Race Recap. Qualifying in 20th position was Mick Schumacher. This was easily Mick Schumacher's worst race of his young F1 career. And for the first time this season, he was being outperformed and outpaced by his teammate Nikita Mazepin in both FP1 and FP2. And it was at the end of FP2, during the race simulation phase, that Mick ended up brushing the wall at the right rear, causing a puncture and bringing out the red flags, stopping the session with only a few minutes to go. The stoppage ended up keeping all the drivers from doing their practice starts. Things did not get better for Mick in FP3 when he had a big shunt essentially destroying the car, causing close to $500,000 worth of damage. Now that's a lot of cheddar for a team like Haas. And worse yet, the car was not able to be repaired in time for qualifying. Come race day, Mick did manage to find a little bit more pace and passed his teammate Mazepin in the hairpin. And I must say, it certainly looked like a bold move. But then again, it's Monaco, and any pass for position is a bold move. Unfortunately for Mick, the pass proved to be worthless. As the race wore on, he developed engine issues and was given the team order to let Nikita pass. By race end, Mick was last of the running cars, finishing in P18, 3 laps down. Now, considering how well Mick has performed thus far this season, I'm not going to be too critical. Let's face it, Monaco's hard. Monaco's really hard, especially when driving a Formula 1 car. But I'm sure that Mick would be the first one to tell you that this performance was well below his standards. And for those reasons, I rate Mick Schumacher's performance in Monaco as 2 out of 10. Qualifying in 19th place was Nikita Mazepin. Unlike his teammate, Nikita actually had his best race of the season, getting the better of Mick in both FP1, FP2, quali, and the race. Now, I haven't been afraid to be critical of Nikita's performance thus far this season, but if I'm prepared to be critical, I also must be prepared to give praise when somebody does a good job, and that's precisely what Nikita did this weekend. He may have finished 3 laps down, but that's basically where the car is. He did outperform Mick, he didn't hit anything, and most importantly for Haas, after footing the $500,000 Mick Schumacher crash bill, he brought the car home in one piece. And therefore, I rate Nikita Mazepin's performance this weekend in Monaco as a 6.5 out of 10. Qualifying in 18th position was Nicholas Latifi. Fair to say that Latifi entered Monaco completely bewildered with the inconsistent handling and performance of his Williams. So much so that the team did a complete teardown of his car looking for an issue. But alas, they found nothing. Which leads me to believe that the issue for Latifi may lie in the engine mapping, or more specifically, the engine braking program. This was evident in FP2. When going down into the hairpin, Latifi went too deep, and he complained that the car pushed forward. He then had a fairly big crash in FP3. Luckily for him, the team managed to repair the car in time for qualifying. He seemed to get a little bit of a handle on things by race day, where he found himself lapping pretty close to George Russell's pace, and he ended up making up 3 positions throughout the race, finishing 1 lap down in P15. I would categorize this as another solid, steady performance by Latifi, and therefore, I give him a Monaco rating of 6 out of 10. Qualifying in 17th position was Fernando Alonso. Ew. Ew. 17th position, Fernando. What are you doing? I was expecting a lot more from this two-time Monaco champion. And to be honest, I was expecting a lot more from Alpine. And no doubt, so was Fernando, before he signed for the 2021-2022 seasons. The weekend got off to a fairly decent start for Fernando as he outpaced Ocon in free practice. That was until he hit the Armco in the final corner and broke the front wing. Things only got worse in qualifying, where he was knocked out in Q1. Meanwhile, his teammate Esteban Ocon was qualifying in P11. Despite his poor form as of late, I've been very impressed with Fernando Alonso's attitude lately. And it was just last week that he insisted that Alpine not make any adjustments to the car to suit his driving style this season, and instead, he wants them to focus on the 2022 car. But then I read today that Alpine are expecting to bring upgrades to the car to help Fernando's driving style next race. So I must admit, I'm a little confused. Well, I'm usually confused, but that's a different topic. Despite finishing the race in P13, I still think it was a very disappointing weekend for Alpine and for Fernando. And once again, he was outperformed by his younger teammate, Esteban Ocon. And therefore, I rate Fernando Alonso's performance in Monaco as a 5 out of 10. Qualifying in 16th position was Yuki Tsunoda. In just 5 races this season, Yuki has already gone from the F1 media darling in race 1 to now earning the ire of Dr. Helmut Marko. Going into Monaco, AlphaTauri laid out a few goals that they wanted Yuki to achieve. Number 1, keep your nose clean. Number 2, learn the track and gain experience. And number 3, bring the car home in one piece. Sounds easy enough, right? Wrong. Things didn't go as planned. Yuki hit the Armco early in free practice and ended up missing the rest of the session. This was incredibly valuable track time for him to get used to the circuit, and he lost out. He ended up getting knocked out in Q1. Meanwhile, his teammate Pierre Gasly was qualifying in P6. AlphaTauri decided to go long with Yuki's strategy, hoping for a safety car, but that safety car never materialized, and he finally pitted on lap 66. Shortly after his pit stop, Yuki did post the fastest lap of the race up until that time, although it would not have counted considering he was outside of the top 10. He ended up bringing the car home in the exact same place that he qualified, in P16, exactly 10 places behind his teammate. To be fair, it wasn't all Yuki's fault. The team's strategy was flawed, and for this reason, I give him a little bit of a break, but I still rate his performance at Monaco as a 4 out of 10. I'm certain that Dr. Helmut Marko doesn't like to wear egg on his face, and I'm also certain that he's getting a lot of pressure from Honda to keep Yuki in that seat, but one has to wonder how long this is going to go on for. If Yuki's performances continue to go downhill, Helmut Marko, before long, will be daydreaming about Alex Albon in that car, and it might just become a reality. Qualifying in 15th position was Mr. Saturday, George Russell. Despite outperforming his teammate, it was a bit of a quiet race for George in Monaco. The Williams really never showed any threatening pace throughout the entire weekend, and I think it's fair to say that both George Russell and Nicholas Latifi got the most out of the Williams car. And regardless of whether or not the Williams was in contention or not, it would have been nice to have seen a little bit more of them, considering it was their 750th Grand Prix. But as it stands, George had a typical Monaco Grand Prix, qualifying in 15th and finishing in 14th due to Bottas's retirement. There really wasn't much more he could have done, and therefore, I rate George's performance in Monaco as a 6.5 out of 10. Despite enduring what must have been a pretty boring race for George, he did have a very memorable moment with Fernando Alonso this weekend when they exchanged helmets. And on that helmet, Fernando was very flattering, describing George as a future world champion. Now, we all know you can't win the world championship with a car that toils at the back of the field, so I wonder what Fernando knows that we don't, or what hasn't been announced yet. Wink, wink. Qualifying in 14th position was the Iceman, Kimi Räikkönen. Kimi started off the season driving quite well, but it seems like his performance is starting to taper off. And the fact that his teammate, Antonio Giovinazzi, has certainly upped his game in the last few races, it's become a little bit more noticeable. Kimi did have a massive lockup in FP1 before showing great pace in FP2. And to the F1 observer, it looked like Kimi was starting to get a handle on the car and was in a position to have a great race in Monaco. But as we know, in order to have a great race in Monaco, you must qualify well, and Kimi did not, struggling to get his tires up to temperature. Another important ingredient to doing well in Monaco is experience, and that is something that Kimi has in vast supply. And yet, despite that experience, he once again had to endure an entire race without his drinking bottle, which wasn't hooked up, which he was sure to complain about over the radio on the cool-down lap after the race. All in all, it was a decent weekend for Kimi, who ended up finishing in P11, one lap down, and just outside the points. Overall, I think Kimi had a pretty good weekend, and I would rate his Monaco race as 6.5 out of 10. Qualifying in 13th place was Lance Stroll. Monaco was the first race this year where Seb actually had better pace than Lance all throughout free practice. Lance, like many of the other drivers in the field who are driving cars with a low rake setting, was struggling with low tire temperatures, and it hampered his qualifying performance. Thankfully for Aston Martin, they can rely on Lance's ability to save the tires throughout the race, and they decided to start him on the hard tire. And the overcut has always promised to be very fruitful in Monaco. And in Lance's case, it certainly was, as he made up 5 places and finished in P8. So far, he's continued to score points. Not a lot, but it's been consistent. And this is key for Aston Martin, especially during these tough times right now, where the car isn't at the level that they want it to be at. Despite Lance being far off of Seb's pace all weekend long, I still rate this performance very highly. And I give Lance Stroll a rating at Monaco of 8 out of 10. Qualifying in 12th position was the Honey Badger, Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel's performance in Monaco was both confusing and disappointing, considering he's a past winner here and loves the circuit. He came into the Monaco race on a bit of a high, showing a lot more pace last race and looked a lot more comfortable in the McLaren. That's what made his performance in free practice so difficult to understand when he finished near the bottom of the timesheets and he was complaining of rear-end stability. There was one lap that I was watching that looked like his pace was a little bit better, but unfortunately he ran into traffic before the end of it, and we never got to see a decent time. I thought that would at least bode well for him going into qualifying, and it did slightly. But it wasn't enough, especially when you compare it to Lando, who qualified in P5, and essentially ran a second a lap faster than Daniel all weekend long. And when you combine a midfield starting position and lack of pace around Monaco, it leads to you getting lapped by your teammate, which is what Lando did on lap 52. Daniel ended up finishing in the exact same position he qualified in P12, and no doubt this was a disappointment for the team and for himself. And after the race, Daniel looked thoroughly dejected. Hopefully, this will turn out like his time in Renault, now Alpine of course, where it took Daniel quite a bit of time to get up to speed, but once he did, he was very fast. McLaren themselves have recognized that Daniel is struggling mightily, and they have pledged to put together a new chassis for him in time for the next race. In the meantime, Daniel's going to take a few days away from the F1 circus to get his head on straight. And I, like most Formula One fans, certainly hope they figure this out for him. Because F1 is certainly a better sport with Daniel Ricciardo at the front of the grid. With all that being said, it truly pains me that I'm rating Daniel Ricciardo's drive at Monaco as a 4 out of 10. Qualifying in 11th position was Esteban Ocon. If you are a frequent listener to my podcast, you'll recall that I placed Esteban Ocon on my 2021 hot seat. And thus far, based on his performance this season, he's no longer on the hot seat. He's now a hot commodity. His noticeable improvement this year has caught the eye of everybody in the F1 paddock and has led Alpine to start talks to try and renew his contract for next year. This indicates a few things to me. Number one, they are obviously very happy with his performance, especially when compared to his multi-world champion teammate, Fernando Alonso. And number two, it potentially validates everything that I've been saying this year. And that is that George Russell has already been signed to drive for Mercedes next year. And we're only waiting on confirmation that Sir Lewis Hamilton is going to renew with a multi-year deal in the coming months. This may be a bit of a disappointment to Esteban. But you know what? Considering Alpine's vast resources, there are worse places to be on the grid. And besides, I doubt Lewis Hamilton will sign for any more than 2 or 3 years. At which time, Mercedes, I'm sure, will be very interested in his services, especially if he continues to drive like this. Because as we saw in Monaco, he clearly outperformed Fernando Alonso in qualifying and in the race, and gained 2 positions over where he qualified, finishing P9. And thus, his performance at Monaco earns a rating of 7.5 out of 10. Qualifying in 10th position was Antonio Giovinazzi. Antonio is another driver that I placed on my 2021 hot seat, and he's coming off his best drive of the season. Had it not been for a flat tire during his pit stop, during the last race, I am sure he would have scored his first points of the season. Despite his bad luck last race, Antonio was still coming to Monaco, full of confidence. And it showed, as he had terrific pace in free practice and in qualifying. And had it not been for traffic, he thought he could have qualified in P8. And as it turned out, he had a very solid drive in Monaco, finishing in the same position that he qualified in, P10. And therefore, I rate his drive at Monaco as 7.5 out of 10. Qualifying in 9th position was Sergio Perez. Sergio stated after the first race that he thought it would take approximately 4 to 5 races for him to get used to the Red Bull, and Monaco was his 5th race. And after going fastest in Free Practice 1, Sergio's prediction looked to be completely accurate. But as per usual, qualifying is always dictated in Monaco by your ability to deal with traffic. And your ability to deal with traffic not only depends on the driver, but also on how the team places you out on the track. This didn't go as planned for Sergio, as he was both in traffic and then finally had his last hot lap interrupted by the crash of Charles Leclerc. Starting in P9 was not ideal, and the narrow streets of Monaco make it incredibly difficult to pass and make up positions, so therefore Red Bull were relying on Sergio's ability to make the team's strategy work out. And like other teams who were successful with their pit strategy, they chose to do the overcut, and Sergio went long. His vast experience and race pace on Sunday proved to be pivotal, as Sergio made up 5 places and finished P4. And most importantly for Red Bull, he finished in front of both of the Mercedes, and this is something that Alex Albon was unable to do last year. As soon as Sergio gets a handle on qualifying, he is going to be a serious threat at the front of the grid. And this is precisely what Red Bull were looking for when they signed him, and precisely what Mercedes were fearing. As I have stated before, I truly believe that once Sergio Perez is comfortable in the Red Bull, he will definitely come out on top in a one-on-one battle with Valtteri Bottas, and this will prove pivotal at the end of the season in terms of the Constructors' Championship. His experienced combative drive in Monaco and bag full of points earned Sergio Perez a Monaco Grand Prix rating of 8 out of 10. Qualifying in 8th position was Sebastian Vettel. Ring-a-ding-ding, Sebastian. It appears there's still some life left in the 4-time world champion. And for the first time this season, he had the better of his teammate Lance Stroll. Seb started the weekend off with great pace in both Free Practice 1 and Free Practice 2 before a very concerning moment when he complained that he had something in his eye. And I don't know about you, but Monaco's the last place I'd want to be driving a Formula 1 car when I can't see. Thankfully, it was nothing serious, and he headed into qualifying full of confidence for the first time in the season. Qualifying in P8 meant that Seb was still within reaching distance of the leaders, and this was critical come Sunday. Aston Martin used the overcut to perfection, moving Seb from P8 to P5, getting him past both Sir Lewis and Gasly during the pit stops. In fact, the best action on Sunday was between Seb and Gasly. As Seb exited the pits and Gasly came down into turn 1, both raced side by side going up the hill, when inexcusably the TV director cut away from the action, showing a scene of Lance Stroll bouncing over the sausage curb in the swimming pool section. What we missed was seriously hard, brave racing between these two guys, with Seb coming out on top. This result was massive for Aston Martin, for Seb, and for his fans all around the world. And therefore I give him a Monaco Grand Prix rating of 8.5 out of 10. Qualifying in 7th position was Sir Lewis Hamilton. Lewis came into Monaco not only as the individual points leader, but also on the cusp of signing a new multi-year deal with Mercedes. And the expectation is it will be announced before the summer months. From the get-go, Lewis was struggling in Monaco, and essentially, he was outperformed by his teammate all weekend long. The main issue that Lewis was complaining about was the balance of the car, and it seemed like every setup that they tried continued to move the car in the opposite direction they wanted, which was a bit perplexing considering that Valtteri was actually improving the car as the weekend went along. Things didn't improve come qualifying, and then finally, Lewis was hampered by the crash of Charles Leclerc. Could he have placed his car in the top 2 on the grid? I doubt it. Could he have made up a place or 2? Maybe, but it didn't really matter. We're just not used to seeing Sir Lewis in P7. And for the first time in a long time, it started to look like there were some cracks in Sir Lewis's armor. Sir Lewis found himself stuck behind Pierre Gasly for the first half of the race, and was focusing on conserving his tires, allowing Mercedes to choose the overcut option, which for some reason they didn't, unlike every other team that was succeeding that day. Mercedes decided to pit him early, and despite Pierre Gasly having a very slow outlap on the hard tires, he still managed to stay in front. His disgust with the situation was clearly evident as he spoke over the team radio and said to them, "Why did you ask me to conserve my tires if you were going to pit me early?" And now he had lost positions through pit stops. 3 positions, in fact. The only positive of the weekend came near the end of the race, when on lap 68, he had a large enough gap over Lance Stroll to pit again and go for the fastest lap, which he achieved. All things considered, it was a poor performance in Monaco by Mercedes and by the 7-time world champion. And therefore, I give him a Monaco Grand Prix rating of 6 out of 10. Qualifying in 6th position was Pierre Gasly. In recent podcasts, I've noted that Pierre Gasly is one of those drivers this year that has gotten absolutely nothing out of his qualifying performances. And after seeing his performance in Free Practice 1, where he was close to half a second faster than Tsunoda, and at one point topped the timesheets with 12 minutes to go, I must admit, I had all my fingers and my toes crossed that Pierre would finally cash in on a good race day. And considering that he was starting in P6, and the AlphaTauri has the high rake setting on the car, I was anticipating that he'd be able to get those tires up to speed immediately and hopefully make some passes in the initial laps. Unfortunately for Pierre, that didn't happen, but there were a lot of positives in Monaco for him. The fact that he was running 10 positions higher than his highly regarded young teammate in Yuki Tsunoda was one. He was also able to hold off 7-time world champion Sir Lewis Hamilton, not only up until the first pit stops, but throughout the entire race. The only glitch for Pierre on race day was after his pit stop. When he came out on the hards, for some reason he was unable to get them up to temperature and his lap was quite slow. And this allowed Sebastian Vettel to come out even with him in turn 1, after Aston Martin decided to go 1 lap longer. With Pierre on the outside, unfortunately he wasn't able to get back on the racing line and had to go through the marbles while side by side with Seb. And as I mentioned previously, the camera director turned away from this action and instead focused on Lance Stroll, jumping over the sausage curb in the swimming pool section. At last glance, there certainly wasn't much room between them, but Pierre did the reasonable thing and backed out. Like many others in the race, he finished where he qualified, in P6. P5 would have been better, but P6 is still a very solid result, and compared to Yuki, he dominated. And therefore, I give Pierre Gasly a Monaco Grand Prix rating of 8.5 out of 10. Here's hoping that he can build on this performance and continue to gain attention throughout the paddock, because let's face it, his Red Bull dreams are over, and AlphaTauri will never be good enough to put him in a position where his driving talents can win the world title. Now you may be saying to yourself, world title? Matt, what are you talking about? Well, in a recent poll amongst his peers on the grid, Pierre Gasly is the most underrated driver in Formula One, and I, for one, completely agree with them. Qualifying in 5th position was Lando Norris. Lando comes to Monaco, rewarded by McLaren for his fantastic efforts thus far with a new multi-year deal, and is looking to bounce back after an off weekend in Catalunya. Once again, Lando looked far more comfortable in the McLaren when compared to his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, and he certainly had his way with him all the way through free practice and qualifying. And come race day, he had that measured off as well. Lando was running a very strong race, and despite being warned with black and white flags for track limits, which I didn't even think was possible at Monaco, he managed to hold off a fast-charging Sergio Perez in the superior Red Bull, and at the end of the day, Lando made up 2 positions and scored his very first Monaco podium. When you take into account the skill level and experience of Daniel Ricciardo and how much he's struggling in that McLaren right now, Lando really is driving very well this year, and my respect for his skills only go up every single race. And thus, I rate his Monaco Grand Prix performance in that beautiful Gulf Oil liveried McLaren this weekend as a 9.5 out of 10. Qualifying in 4th position for Scuderia Ferrari, Carlos Sainz. Yet again, we see a fantastic performance by Carlos, and he is the one driver who switched teams who's actually thriving this year. Up until this point, he has shown flashes of brilliance in all areas, and in Monaco, he was looking to put it all together on race day. He was immediately on Charles's pace in free practice, and in fact, he was atop the timesheets in FP2, only to be bettered by Charles with a few minutes to go left in the session. Carlos was also one of the drivers who had his final hot lap in qualifying impeded by Charles Leclerc's crash. Although not up on his time, he honestly felt that he was still going to be able to better it, despite only having a few corners left. Alas, the red flags came out and it wasn't meant to be. But still, Carlos proved to be Ferrari's savior on Sunday, when he moved up 2 positions and finished in 2nd place. Make no doubt about it, this was a very strong drive, and it certainly scored a lot of points for Ferrari, but more importantly, it provided a lift on a very difficult day, for not only for Carlos, but for the team and all of the tifosi around the world. And therefore, I rate Carlos's drive in the Monaco Grand Prix as a 9 out of 10. Qualifying in 3rd position was Valtteri Bottas 5.0. In the week leading up to the Monaco Grand Prix, Valtteri had made a statement that he wished to know where he stood with regards to 2022 and Mercedes. And as I have stated on numerous occasions, I already believe that George Russell has signed for Mercedes in 2022. That only leaves one seat available, and that seat right now is currently between Valtteri and Sir Lewis. The mere fact that Valtteri came out to the press with this statement I also found quite puzzling, and totally out of character. And in my opinion, this wasn't a message to Toto and Mercedes. This was a message to the rest of the paddock that Valtteri is available come next year. In the meantime, Valtteri has to put his head down and really dig deep, because so far this season has been a massive disappointment for him. And dig deep he did. In Monaco, he managed to improve a pretty awful Mercedes and certainly outperformed Sir Lewis. He continued to get faster every single session until finally, in qualifying, his final hot lap was impeded by Leclerc's crash like many before him. Yet again, Valtteri was presented with a golden opportunity to be the savior for Mercedes on race day, based on the fact that Sir Lewis was not competitive and nowhere near the lead. And yet again, it didn't work out for him or Mercedes. The old cliché that if he didn't have any bad luck, he'd have no luck at all, is starting to seriously ring true for Valtteri. He got off to a fantastic start once the lights went out, but he felt the pinch going into turn 1 with Max Verstappen and backed out of it. This was both surprising and understandable. On one hand, Valtteri needs race wins and a lot of points right now to catch up. But on the other, Max is the one who had everything to lose going into turn 1, and I can only wonder now what would have happened if Valtteri had kept his nose in there and his foot on the loud pedal. He ended up tucking in behind Max and followed him for the first 32 laps, quite comfortably it must be said. Then, Valtteri pitted, and everything went wrong. He brought the car to a halt in his box, and unfortunately they couldn't get the front right tire off. And rumor has it, they still haven't been able to get that tire off, despite the fact that Ferrari came down after the race and offered assistance. Valtteri took off his belts and climbed out of the car. Only moments ago he was in P2, and now he was the second retirement of the race. Afterwards, Toto Wolff came out and said that the incident was actually caused by the fact that Valtteri Bottas had not hit his marks in the box. I was quite surprised that Toto had made that statement, and it certainly felt like he was throwing Bottas under the bus. Normally, this is the kind of statement that we see from Dr. Helmut Marko, so I was quite surprised. This led me to review numerous camera angles after the race to see exactly what had happened. And I have to say, in my opinion, Toto's full of it. If you'd like to take a look at these videos, I've posted them on my Twitter. If you have a moment, please check them out, because I would certainly love to hear your thoughts and comments about the incident. In my opinion, Bottas did hit his marks. He might have been slightly right of them, but the pit lane in Monaco is so narrow that trying to navigate your way into your own box can be kind of difficult. But as far as where he actually stopped the car, he was perfectly perpendicular to his line. Now when you take a look at the video, pay attention to the wheel gunman's arms. His left arm is definitely hit by the replacement tire that's about to go on the car. And it's this action that stops the wheel gunman from getting the gun on the wheel nut properly. And instead, when he pulled the trigger, it just simply sheared everything off of it, completely stripping the wheel nut of its teeth. And according to the rules set by the FIA, a driver cannot go out in his car if he has different types of tires on it. Thus, Valtteri's afternoon came to an end. I have to admit, I feel sorry for Valtteri in this race, because he put together a very strong weekend, and based on that performance before the car's retirement, I rate Valtteri Bottas' Monaco Grand Prix as a 9 out of 10. Mercedes ended up issuing a statement that the tire would have to be removed once they got it back to the factory. This was despite the fact that Ferrari came down after the race and attempted to help them take it off, and they couldn't even do it. I personally have never seen a driver have to retire from a race because they couldn't take a tire off, and again, this was more bad luck for Valtteri. And I sincerely hope before the end of the season that his luck finally changes, because a drive like this needed to be rewarded, not criticized by the team principal. Qualifying in pole position for Scuderia Ferrari was Charles Leclerc. Now, before you say, Matt, wake up, you forgot about Max. I had to do this a certain way. I wasn't going to end the podcast with, oh, and on pole for Scuderia Ferrari, Charles Leclerc. The end. That just wouldn't be right. Charles is one of 4 drivers ever to compete in Formula 1 from Monaco. And despite having raced here on numerous occasions and in different forms of racing, Charles has never done well in Monaco. And as a result, the F1 press has jumped all over it and named this the Charles Leclerc curse. Now, I've never been the type of person to believe in curses. In fact, I think that stuff is all nonsense. But after watching Charles this weekend in Monaco, I'm going to have to revisit that opinion. In free practice 1, Charles drove by a balcony full of friends and waved at them. And then 3 laps later, he was forced to retire the car with gearbox issues. Things seemed to take a turn for the better, where in free practice 2, Charles topped the timesheets. His performance in FP3, Q1 and Q2 remained very solid, and very promising, it must be said. And to everyone's delight in Monaco, after his first hot lap in Q3, Charles Leclerc found himself in pole position. It was his final hot run in Q3 where all the issues happened. Charles, no doubt, looking at the leaderboard and seeing people like Max Verstappen, his teammate Carlos Sainz, and Valtteri Bottas closing the gap on him, was trying extra hard. And for the first time this season, the Ferrari was very competitive, and as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, F1's all about capitalizing on your opportunities. And Charles definitely had the bit between his teeth, and he was going for it. With Monaco glory on the horizon, Charles misjudged his turn-in point at the swimming pool section, and he hit the Armco, which destroyed the steering mechanism of the front right tire. No longer able to steer, he went right through the chicane and hit the Armco on the other side, with the front right portion of the car, which then snapped the right rear round, and that hit the Armco as well. His crash brought an end to Q3 and secured pole position for the Monegasque. Some people were immediately quick to judge whether or not Charles did it intentionally to keep pole position, much like Michael Schumacher did when he parked his car at Rascasse. This never crossed my mind. There's a big difference between parking your car and crashing your car. Now the big question Saturday night was, would Charles Leclerc have to replace his gearbox and take a 5-place penalty? Or would Ferrari be able to figure out what was wrong with it and replace some of the parts, ensuring that he could still start from pole? After inspection and replacement of the broken parts, Ferrari cleared the car to start from pole, and Charles made his way out to the grid, only to discover that the left-hand side of the gearbox was also damaged in the crash. Specifically, it was the left-hand side's drive shaft and its coupling that were broken. And sadly, Charles' race was over before it even began, and the curse reared its ugly head once again. Overall, I thought Charles drove incredibly well all weekend long, but he does have to take responsibility for crashing the car. Therefore, I rate Charles Leclerc's performance in Monaco as a 7 out of 10. Qualifying in second position, but starting in pole position, was Max Verstappen. Coming into Monaco, pressure was definitely building on Red Bull and Max to stop squandering these opportunities they have early on in the season, and Monaco presented them with the ultimate opportunity. The high rake setting on the Red Bull and the flexible rear wing proved to be an amazing combination. And despite complaining of no front-end grip, Max continually found himself amongst the top of the timesheets throughout the weekend. And he was up on his time in Q3 when the session was stopped. Once it was determined that Charles would not be able to start the race, it was Max who found himself in P1 once the lights went out on Sunday. And despite the fact that Valtteri got off the line quicker, Max made it very clear that he was not going to be denied in Monaco when he ran Valtteri out of room and made him yield. After Valtteri retired on lap 32, it was smooth sailing for Max all the way to the checkered flag. Both he and the car performed faultlessly on Sunday. And now, for the first time in his career, Max Verstappen is leading the World Driving Championship. And I'm also willing to bet that for the first time in his career, come next race, if he finds himself side by side with Sir Lewis Hamilton in turn 1, he's going to quickly discover what it's like to have everything to lose with F1 glory on his horizon.
Yes. Oh, nice race. Oh, well done. I think we managed that really well, guys. Super happy.
Max Verstappen, you're a Monaco Grand Prix winner. That was brilliant. That was your afternoon. Big Adrian's coming up to get the trophy with you. Well done.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I think perfect tire life as well. So, yeah, super happy with this win.
That was masterclass, and you're leading the World Championship. Well done, mate.
Not too bad of a Sunday.
We've had some sad times around here, Max, and we won't forget those. That makes this even sweeter. Honestly, I'm really proud of you. Nice job.
I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I've been your host, Matthew Kane, and until next time, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.